31.7%. That's how much of America's net worth the top 1% owns right now. 31.7%. Now, here's the part that makes people mad. If your paycheck goes up by $1,000, the government notices. Nothing happens. How is that possible? Because the rich don't live on income the way you do. They live on ownership. But it taxes ownership quietly. So today I'm going to explain a three-word strategy that sounds like a conspiracy, but it's mostly just math, law, and good paperwork. Buy, borrow, die. And before you roll your eyes and say, "That's for billionaires," hold on. Because the principle is bigger than the headline. Here's the real question. But the wealthy borrow cash and keep the asset. And why does that one choice change their taxes for decades? Harry didn't learn this from a finance influencer. At 2:17 a.m., Harry worked as an insurance processor. He spent his nights reading claims, checking policy language, and explaining bad news in polite sentences. His take-home pay was $3,779 a month. He split a two-bedroom with a roommate, and his half of rent was $1,111. But his credit card balance was still sitting at $3,597, growing teeth every month. Harry wasn't broke, but he felt trapped. And if you've ever felt that, you know exactly what that does to your brain. You don't think in decades, you think in Fridays. That's where this story starts. Because the buy, borrow, die move isn't about luxury. It's about control. You'll see taxes differently forever. Now, most people believe taxes are mostly about rates. You earn, they take. But the wealthiest play a different game. They play timing, they play classification, they play the difference between realized and unrealized. But it's actually simple. When you work a job, you get paid in cash. That cash is income, and income is taxable right now. When you own an asset that goes up in value, you didn't get paid in cash. You got paid in appreciation. And in most systems, appreciation isn't taxed until you sell. That one detail is the door. You can get rich without triggering taxes. You can live without triggering taxes too. That's the borrow part. And the die part is where the real magic happens, not magic like illegal. The rules were written this way. Let's translate the 3 steps into human language. Step 1 is buy. You buy things that have a history of going up over time. Businesses, land, index funds, real estate, stuff that can compound while you sleep. Not lottery tickets, not memes, not hype, just assets. Step 2 is borrow. Instead of selling those assets when you want to spend, you use them as collateral for a loan. The bank looks at your asset and says, "You own that. It has value. If you don't pay us back, we can take it." Without you selling. And here's the key. A loan is not income. It's debt. Debt isn't taxed the way income is taxed. Step 3 is die. When you die, many tax systems reset the starting price for your heirs on certain assets. That's called a step-up in basis in the United States. The IRS explains that inherited property's basis is generally the fair market value at the date of death, depending on the asset and rules. And that's the part that makes people's heads tilt. So you can buy, borrow for years, and then pass it on with a reset. For many assets, under current rules. That's why buy, borrow, die became a phrase in the first place. And it's why the richest people can look like they're paying a tiny fraction compared to the growth of their wealth. ProPublica calculated something they called a true tax rate for the 25 richest Americans. They found those 25 people got $401 billion richer from 2014 to 2018 and paid $13.6 billion in federal income taxes, which they described as about 3.4%. That number isn't about whether you like them. It's about how the system behaves. So here's the emotional punch. You pay taxes because your wealth shows up as income. They avoid taxes because their wealth shows up as growth. Same country, different scoreboard. Here's where most people get the topic wrong. They think this is a loophole, like a hidden door. It's not one door. It's a whole hallway built from 3 normal rules. Unrealized gains aren't taxed yet. Loans aren't income. And inherited assets often get a reset. Stack those rules, and you get a lifestyle. And you don't need to be a billionaire to understand the mechanism. But you do need to be honest about the risk, or it can be a disaster. So let's put this into a story you can feel. Harry had a habit, a normal habit. Every time something expensive happened, he sold something. He sold the little bit of investing he had. He sold his future to survive the present. And he'd tell himself, I'll invest again later. And he'd do it again. Later never came. Then one night, Harry had to process a claim for a guy who owned a small chain of storage facilities. The claim was boring. A storm damaged a roof. The payout was large but routine. What wasn't routine was the paperwork attached. There was a loan document, a big one, and the loan interest was lower than Harry's credit card APR by a mile. Why is this guy borrowing when he's clearly rich? Why not just sell something? And that's when Harry bumped into the idea that changes everything. The rich don't sell the goose, they borrow against the eggs. And if you're thinking, okay, but I'm not a real estate mogul, good. Because this isn't about copying billionaire behavior. This is about copying billionaire logic. Here's the logic in one line. Borrowing can preserve compounding, not like free money. So Harry built a rule, a weird rule. He called it the Collateral Clock. Simple. Every month on the same night he paid rent, Harry wrote down two numbers in his phone notes, how much his assets were worth and how much debt he owed. Then he wrote one sentence under it. If I sell, I pay twice. Us once in lost future growth. That sentence became his brake pedal. Because most people sell without feeling the future cost. Harry wanted to feel it. And that's the invisible psychology part. You can't see it on a spreadsheet, but you can see it in behavior. Because the 70% moment is where this clicks. But first, you need one missing piece. Why are loans cleaner than sales for taxes? When you sell an asset, the government cares about the gain. The difference between what you paid and what it's worth now. That gain is taxable. When you borrow, you didn't create a gain event. You just created a liability. You still own the asset, so nothing realized happened. That's why wealthy households can fund spending with borrowing and keep the assets climbing. And if you're thinking, so they borrow forever? Yes, sometimes. Or they refinance, they roll loans, they restructure, they use dividends or business cash flow to service interest. When death happens, the asset can transfer with that basis reset, depending on the rules. That's the die step again. Now, does that mean nobody pays anything? No. Property taxes exist. Interest exists. Estate rules exist. There are limits and trade-offs. But the direction is clear. Selling turns growth into taxes today. Borrowing turns growth into cash without taxes today. That's the difference. And it's why the buy, borrow, die phrase spread across finance circles. Okay, now the reveal. Remember the book I'm about to name because it's not a tax book, it's a behavior book. Morgan Housel wrote something in The Psychology of Money that hits this topic perfectly. He says the key to long-term wealth isn't just getting returns, it's staying in the game. Survival beats brilliance. That's the hidden truth of buy, borrow, die. It's not the rich are smarter. It's the rich avoid being forced to sell. And there's data that shows why that matters. They have a massive base of assets to borrow against. That base gives them options most people don't even see. And that's exactly what ProPublica's work highlighted. Wealth can explode while taxable income looks small. Because the growth isn't showing up as income until it's realized. Now here's Harry's proof. The part that made him stop treating investing like a piggy bank. In late summer, Harry finally got his credit card down to $1,973. But manageable. He had also built a small investment account, not big, just steady. Side it was worth $9,171. Then his car did what cars do. It needed a repair that cost $1,187. Old Harry would have sold investments immediately. New Harry opened his phone note. Collateral Clock. He wrote the numbers. Assets, $9,171. Debt, $1,973. Then he asked himself a question that felt uncomfortable. If I sell, what do I lose? The compounding. So Harry did something that felt backwards. He called his bank and asked about a small line of credit option tied to his overall relationship, and he asked one specific thing. What's the rate and what's the fee? Harry wasn't trying to game anything. He was trying to avoid being forced. He ended up using a small loan for that repair, then set a payoff plan that matched his cash flow. And he made a promise to himself, not a lifestyle. That's the difference between smart borrowing and stupid borrowing. Smart borrowing is temporary, planned, and attached to an asset strategy. Stupid borrowing is permanent, emotional, and attached to ego. Harry used the loan for 83 days, or he paid it off with an odd, specific rhythm that fit his pay cycle. And here's what changed. He didn't sell his investments, so his future self didn't get robbed. He stayed in the game. That's the whole cheat code, not tax evasion, not a loophole. Just staying invested while your life happens. Now, zoom out. The wealthy do this with stocks, businesses, and real estate at scale. They buy assets, they let them rise. They borrow against them to fund living or reinvestment. And because borrowing isn't taxed like income, they can keep the asset compounding. Then, depending on the law, death can wipe out decades of built-up taxable gains through that basis reset. You don't have to like it to understand it. And you don't have to copy the extremes to use the lesson. So what's the lesson for a normal person? Here's the part most people miss. The rich aren't avoiding taxes because they're evil geniuses. They're avoiding taxes because they've arranged their life so they don't need to sell. That's it. They don't liquidate. They leverage. But you can absolutely adopt the identity shift. Stop thinking, how do I make more income? Only. Start thinking, how do I build ownership that doesn't force selling? And that starts with one change. You need a personal rule for when selling is allowed. Because without a rule, you sell when you're stressed. And stress is expensive. Harry's rule became brutally simple. He only sold assets for 2 reasons. 1, to improve the asset mix if something got wildly out of balance. 2, for a life event that changed the whole board. Not for a flat tire, not for a broken phone, not for a random emergency. For those, not by doing a cute budget, but by designing friction. He did one thing that sounds too small to matter, but it changed his life. He moved his spendable money bank card into a drawer and loaded a separate low-limit card into his wallet for daily spending. Not a new account system, not a spreadsheet, just physical friction. If he wanted to spend big, he had to go home, open the drawer, and choose it on purpose. He didn't. That's how regular people get some of the same benefit the rich get from complexity. They create a pause. Because the wealthy have teams and structures, you need a pause and a rule. Now, a quick reality check. Because I'm not going to oversell this. Borrowing against assets can wreck you if you borrow too much, if rates jump, or if your asset drops at the wrong time. Margin calls exist. Forced selling exists. So if you're not already stable, and the borrow step is not step 2 for you. Your step 2 is don't be forced. Your job is to build enough stability that selling isn't your default emergency response. That's the moral of buy, borrow, die. Avoid forced selling. Because forced selling creates taxes, creates regret, and kills compounding. And there's one more twist. This whole strategy is also why taxing the rich debates get messy. If you raise income taxes, the ultra-wealthy might not care much. Because they don't live on income. If you want to hit this strategy directly, you have to address borrowing against appreciated assets, unrealized gains, or the step-up rule itself, which researchers and policy groups have discussed as reform options. Again, you don't need to pick a political side to understand the mechanism. You just need to see the board. Now I want you to ask yourself a question. What part of your life forces you to sell? Is it emergencies? Is it lifestyle creep? Is it debt payments? Is it random chaos? That's the leak. And if you fix that leak, you don't need billionaire tricks. You get something better. You get time. You get compounding that actually compounds. You get the feeling that your money isn't fragile. That's what Harry felt the first time he made it through a surprise bill without selling an asset. Calm. And calm is power. So here's the first action. Simple. Pick one asset you're building. Something boring. Something you plan to hold for years. Then write one sentence in your phone right now. Not when life forces it. That sentence is your line in the sand. Because buy, borrow, die isn't really about never paying taxes. It's about building a life where taxes happen not on your panic. It's about building ownership. It's about staying in the game. You'll start noticing something strange. Your money gets quieter. Your choices get bigger. Starts to feel like something you can finally navigate. That's the real rule the rich use. They don't just earn money. They keep the asset. They protect the compounding. And they refuse to be forced. That's the play. Forever.